Well, we're now joined by the Assembly of First Nations National Chief, Cindy Woodhouse Nepinak. National Chief, thank you for joining us again.
Thank you.
Now, you had a news conference today and you told reporters that the budget, quote, falls far short of closing the infrastructure gap for First Nations communities. $918 million has been promised over the next 5 years. What exactly were you hoping for?
Well, certainly, we heard from the Auditor General a couple of weeks ago. We've also just finished a report with Indigenous Services Canada, and it shows that we need a large investment to close the infrastructure gap on First Nations across Canada. And so we're glad for, a small part of this being invested in, but we need much more investments, and we are going to always need investments every single budget to close this infrastructure gap to 2030. This falls far off topic, off the track, so to speak, up to 2030. And I think that we need to get back on track. And I know that things are announced for territories, for provinces, but that leaves out First Nations people and it leaves out First Nations communities. So that's good for the whole country when things are invested out there from this government. But they have to remember that First Nations are very specific, and when there's announcements for provinces would never invest in First Nations communities.
Mm-hmm. And just so for people at home, so that they understand it, $380 billion is the number quoted in terms of trying to close that infrastructure gap. And the Indigenous Services Minister, she says that her government is still committed to closing that gap by 2030. Do you doubt her sincerity in her saying that?
I don't doubt the sincerity. I think what happens as well sometimes is things don't get out fast enough. And I think that we have to begin to find new ways and new processes because the bureaucracy is the way that it is. It doesn't always fit for First Nations. And I think getting those investments out a lot quicker would be helpful in closing some of these gaps and building more homes. Particularly also if we'd focus a bit on schools. We haven't done that in some years. And there's schools on these First Nations communities that, some of our communities need new schools. And we need schools to be renovated that are there. So we have a lot of work to do together. And I think if this country really wants to make the relationship work with First Nations people, it's going to have to take into consideration the experts, our leadership and First Nations on the ground, on getting to better results. Mm-hmm. Because you can, if it's a system that's not working, we're seeing it. And the Auditor General has stated that in her report. But I think that when we make these investments, making sure they actually get out the door instead of into departments that don't know. That some of them, maybe some of the bureaucrats in some of those departments have never been to our First Nations communities. So how would they know how things work? And, I encourage them to come out to the communities.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's interesting because as you say that, I'm thinking of another criticism that you shared, because you're not happy about the lack of consultation that happened with First Nations on this budget. And really that type of consultation and even the funding, getting the money directly out that you're talking about just now, that's not normally how things work. So looking through the lens of reconciliation, how do you see future budgets, future investments being determined and sent out?
Well, they have to, I think, we should start talking now for next year's budget, even for the fall economic statement that will happen in the fall, and then the budget 2025, that we start working and talking about it now, going through the reports that are in front of them. I know that these two reports that I'm talking about were very recent. I know the Auditor General's report was a couple of weeks ago. And of course, our report, with Indigenous Services Canada on housing and infrastructure was just completed a week ago. Let's start from that point and figure out how to make, an impact next federal budget. We're here to work. We're here to listen. We're here to provide advice and support.
Well, it provides advice, support. In fact, to my understanding, you are right now asking for a meeting with the Prime Minister, with the Finance Minister. What exactly are you hoping to accomplish with those meetings?
Well, exactly that, right? Talk about these recent reports, talk about having reconciliation, making sure that things move forward, and working in a better way and finding maybe new policies that will work rather than pushing us into a box and keeping things status quo. We have to think outside the box to make more of an impact on the ground. And, there's some communities out there, for instance, that don't even have cell service. For average Canadians, we're in cities, we could take it, we kind of take advantage of all that or don't even think that it's an issue. But in some of these communities, they don't even have access to that. So stuff like telehealth or, going to university online to do your course from home wouldn't be an option for some of these communities. We have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, a lot of work to do, as you say. But, it's also interesting because as you talk about these priorities, this government has maybe about 18 months left before another election. Does that timeline concern you about trying to get your priorities listened to?
Absolutely. I mean, we will be reaching out to other political parties. We have already, in fact. And so with Pierre and with Jagmeet, and we will continue to do that and to, talk about, give them our submission. And before the next federal election, we are working on an election plan that we will give out to all political parties. That if you want to work with First Nations, here's some good options. I'm going to partner with us, talk to us, work with our people.
Cindy Woodhouse, always appreciate your time. Thank you for this.
Thank you.